Okay, it looks like Twitter. This looks like it'll just be YouTube today. All right, no big deal. So, for those of you checking in or new to this, I'm Yossi Goslin. As you can see in the overlays on the bottom, you can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky on my name. You can find all my videos, podcasts on YouTube, also under my name, and hear all the audio forms on Spotify, Apple, all the podcast providers. Please subscribe to my newsletter, Third Apron, on more deeper salary cap analysis. And you can see all my salary cap information on capsheets.com. And rejoining me from last week, take 2 of this Mavs offseason preview. We are going to be discussing that, just more so like player-centric stuff, what the Mavericks might actually do in the offseason. Joining me today, author of Dallas Hoops Journal, Grant Afseth. Grant, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited to talk about looking ahead with the offseason for the Mavs and think out loud about what may happen, what should happen, all that good stuff. I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one. And we had a lot packed for last week. So basically, the summary of what we did touch on before all the issues happened. Just some post-Luka fallout stuff. And I was, asking you just about your general experience covering everything from the ground floor. You released a very good, post-mortem on the Mavs with everything, just some more developments about the structure of the front office, what might come next. And we basically got to the agreement that they're going to continue this, even though for a lot of us, especially after the Kyrie injury, it seems like this 2-year window that they set for themselves up by doing this trade might be already closed. But I think we both agree that they're going to run this back, salvage whatever they have. And then they'll probably reevaluate from there. We could get into when a pivot can happen, but one of the things you touched on in your piece on Dallas Hoops Journal sounds like Nico Harrison's going to remain, but he might not have full autonomy like he did in the past. So, Grant, what do you think, if you had a choice in the matter, what do you think the Mavs should do? Not necessarily knowing what they're probably going to do, what do you think they should do?
Yeah, I think for the most part, in terms of leadership, I think it sends a very clear signal that moving on from the general manager that's getting the chance that he's getting at the venue every time they play probably would be a good step one, and getting an experienced voice. For me personally, I don't really see too much value in keeping the same GM and bringing in an experienced voice to complement that GM. That just kind of seems like unnecessarily messy when you can just bring in an experienced voice to be the GM altogether. So I think that would probably be what I would do, in terms of kind of leadership structure, because it just seems like you're putting a Band-Aid on something that is not going to go away. So that's probably what I would do for step one.
Yeah, and I think you also touched on how that might go. If there might be some possibility of who they might bring in. Do you have any insights on that?
Not at this time. I do think I think a lot of it is still being sort of thought out in real time. It's definitely a uncharted territory for the organization, with the Mavs having new ownership, dealing with their first really significant problem, I would say, in terms of the direction that they want to go with their leader in the front office. And so I think they're going to have to kind of show us in a way what their thought process is going to be, and this will be kind of a learning experience for everyone who analyzes the Mavs and keeps a close eye on them, kind of that thought process of how they may approach it, whether they use a search firm, or whether someone in the organization's recommendations are weighed heavier than others. So I think that's going to have to be something we'll have to monitor to see how it plays out. But definitely the early stages for sure.
Yeah, it seems that way, and based on some other reportings as well, there's probably going to be a slight change of how things operate going forward. No one, Nico admitted, he didn't really anticipate how this would. It seems like the whole organization didn't anticipate this level of fallout. But as far as their overall direction, so I'm looking at the roster, looking at their payroll situation. You can all see it on capsheets.com. And personally, now that Kyrie tore his ACL and his whole timeline is still pretty unclear, there's some optimism maybe he could be back in January, but I think there's also maybe a possibility he won't be able to play at all. But this is just such a brutal injury after season 14. Like, he's had such a great combination of talent and discipline, and his game might not be the same after having the worst injury of his career this late into his career. I'm definitely worried about any loss of athleticism. Like, what if his drives and free throw attempts, they decline? Is he really going to have that same level of impact? I'm very skeptical of that going forward. So before the Kyrie injury, I would have thought that, yeah, they're definitely going to continue with I didn't rule out their possibility of them actually being a legit championship contender as far as this season that just passed and next season, assuming everyone was healthy. But now we don't know what kind of guy is going to be, and the Mavericks now have a massive hole at point guard. So if we know they're going to keep trying to salvage this at least for this season. If there's going to be some sort of pivot, most likely it would come at the trade deadline if they're still more or less the same level of team that they were after Kyrie's injury. But in this situation, I would probably want to act sooner than later. And there's a lot of people I know, a lot of good writers speculating that they should trade Anthony Davis now, see what they can. A lot of people are wondering, what can the Mavericks get for Anthony Davis? I think they could still get a good amount of stuff, draft picks, young players. If you can't trade Kyrie Irving, do you re-sign him now anyways to like a nice team-friendly deal, see what you could get for him later? Do you want to trade some of the other veterans? And we'll get into a couple of them later on, but especially because they do have this draft pick situation where between 2027 and 2030, I believe they're down 2 draft picks and 2 pick swaps. So if your window's right now, but might not even be there, I think we are heading to some sort of inevitability that they probably gonna have to take somewhat of a step back, and that could involve them recouping some picks back. But they'll still have to remain competitive, because if they're not getting their own picks back, they can't bottom out or anything like that.
Yeah, it kind of seems similar to what happened with the Brooklyn Nets. If I was to kind of look at a team that didn't own their own future until they kind of got creative with that Mikal Bridges trade, recently. So I think, yeah, definitely going to be complicated from a team building standpoint and a financial standpoint. There's just not too much incentive for a team that was coming off the finals, made a big trade, and then having to build their own regional broadcasting network, take financial hits after the Luka trade to go into a rebuild from a business standpoint. But from a roster management standpoint, the longer you wait to trade Anthony Davis, as some of those writers that you had mentioned, I'm sure also are kind of thinking the value kind of declines, and that's your last really valuable option to kind of acquire those assets, be able to at least get some things to where you can position yourself well in the relative short term, but more so long term. I think that's going to have to be the balance they'll have to strike, and I think they're going to have to go into next season most likely looking to be competitive, and that's when you get into that circumstance of, so at least definitively Kyrie Irving is going to miss time to start the season. How much, we don't know, as you mentioned, but you're going to have to make up for that production. And you look at their backcourt, rotation. This is where moving Luka Doncic really hurts, because now you don't have that elite guard to lean on without Kyrie Irving to kind of tide them over like he did when Kyrie missed time in the past. Guys like Jaden Hardy, Brandon Williams. You're going to have to really trust those types of players. And I think that's going to be a tough reality to live in. And then also, they're going to have to be cognizant of back-to-backs as well, because it's one thing to come back from an injury for like an ACL tear midseason, but then you also have to take into account not just the games you miss before that return happens, but also back-to-backs become very challenging for that player to participate in for quite a while. So I just think they're going to have to really focus on that backcourt rotation, have some tough conversations about what production they can get, and probably look to find a veteran that can be a stopgap option, but isn't too, I guess you could say, contract wise, a negative to where you're not investing too much into a short term problem by sacrificing too much to be able to accomplish that. So I think that's probably the number one thing you look at when you're trying to stay competitive as the Mavericks in their current situation.
So let's get into how they could potentially find that guard, because that's going to be the first thing they do. Like they need a guard. They're going to have to do a lot better than Spencer Dinwiddie. Like Jaden Hardy's been pretty good, but yeah, they had 2 elite level playmakers, like you said. Now they have 0, at least for the time being. So I'm looking at their cap sheet right now, and again, like assuming everything, they were healthy or healthy enough, they didn't have any major injury like this. After what they did in the trade deadline, I think the Mavs were looking at this roster and just, they were kind of, they feel like they had a set thing going into next season as well, because they already have 14 players under contract, including their first round pick, which is projected to be 12th overall. So you could, again, everyone, you could see this on capsheets.com. You could go to the Mavs page. So they're 25-26 payroll. They're in a very similar situation as they were this current season, where they're over the tax, but not by too much. They're over the first apron. They're below the second apron. So what does that leave them as far as flexibility? Not too much. And again, if Kyrie was healthy, that's fine. They could have just rolled back this team, and they probably still want to pursue another guard. And but now it's going to be a lot different when that guard you probably could have gotten as your backup is probably now you got to depend on him to start for half the year at least. You don't have the full mid-level exception. You have the taxpayer mid-level, which is worth about $6 million. That's the number one thing, and they can't increase payroll in a trade right now. So they're very limited in what exactly they can do to get a guard. So the first thing we got to look at is Kyrie Irving's player option, because how that plays out could help open up a little more flexibility to get another guard. Before this injury, my feeling about how this was going to play out was, because they traded Luka, that gave Kyrie Irving a lot of leverage, where the Mavs are over the cap. They're not going to be able to replace Kyrie Irving if he were to leave. So he could have opted out and maybe commanded like a 4 or 5 year deal. And I was thinking kind of like what James Harden just got, $35 million a year, but like more years, maybe could have gotten something like that. It takes a little bit of a pay cut. Now I'm not exactly sure how that plays out, just because the injury complicates everything so much. Now I still think Kyrie Irving does have a good amount of leverage to get a long-term deal despite this, because again, the Mavs, they're not going to be able to replace him. And I think ideally they want to keep their high level of depth. They're like 9, 11, like they're kind of like 11 deep when they're fully healthy. And I think that's something that they really want to stick to. So if he were to take somewhat of a pay cut, maybe it could be around the same. Okay, maybe you start to get a little closer to opening up the full mid-level. Maybe you get below the first apron. You can do an imbalanced trade, increase payroll a little bit. I don't know who exactly they'd be trading, because the most expendable guy kind of seems like Dwight Powell. Maybe they want to dump him or use him as the player for salary matching, and they try to run back everyone else. I think they want to run back this team as much as possible. So just broadly speaking, have you thought of any trades or signings that the Mavs could pursue? Anyone that you like? Or do you think for the most part they're just going to like run it back and just bring back like a minimum guard, something like that?
Yeah, I think my current expectation is probably to mostly run it back. I do think when you get into some of the contract extension situations, that's maybe where an opportunity could come. For example, they love Derek Lively, obviously, and he's viewed as the starting center with Anthony Davis at the 4. They ended up playing Anthony Davis more at the 5 with their season on the line than I think they probably intended when they first brought that or formulated this team vision in February. So I think where that kind of puts you in a situation where maybe you can look at Daniel Gafford as a possible trade candidate if you're trying to, bolster your backcourt rotation. He's not someone you want to necessarily trade, but he's someone that, by default becomes the most expendable, especially if you're going to be a little reluctant to pay him on a contract extension necessarily, like to invest too much into the center rotation, especially if you end up in a situation where maybe Anthony Davis needs to spend more like spot minutes at the five, because then that's a lot of investment into centers. And at some point, you're also going to have to pay Derek Lively as well. So that's the general financial situations you got to kind of consider as you're balancing long term, because maybe you could get a different veteran stopgap to be a backup behind Derek Lively if you do move Daniel Gafford. So that at least would give you some salary matching breathing room, if you will, for a guard option. That's where you probably would look into some of those players making around that threshold in the mid-teens, if you will, for a guard. So I haven't dug too deep into that yet, but that's kind of one structure idea that I do have in mind for maybe addressing that backcourt rotation.
If they trade Daniel Gafford, I think they could get a pretty good point guard, a lot better than the ones I'm about to list, because I think most likely they're going to try to just get the best guy they can on the free agency market. I haven't looked into trade yet, but just given their flexibility and just kind of how they're probably viewing this as more of a stopgap situation, and the fact that I think this is a pretty good guard market, I could see them getting someone pretty good for a surprising cost. So as far as Kyrie's situation, if I had to guess, I kind of get the feeling he'll probably opt in. I could be wrong. Again, this injury really complicates things. If he opts in, he could extend later. Maybe the Mavs want to see a little bit how he looks before they commit. They know exactly what to commit to and how many years. But the compromise for Kyrie is if he wants to avoid that uncertainty for what free agency might look like in 2026, maybe you could take something now. You take, you're going from 43 million a year to like maybe low 30s, something like that. We'll see how that plays out. I think there's just too many variables. We'll see exactly what happens later. But assuming he opts in, it's just gonna be, they're gonna have to clear some money then to open up the flexibility they need to sign someone. So I'm looking at the point guard market, but they could they could dump Dwight Powell. They could do a couple things to make the money work, to open up some flexibility. Let's say they open up the full mid-level. They can go after guys like Dennis Schroeder, D'Angelo Russell, Chris Paul. Maybe they don't need to give them the full mid-level amount, like that. It's up to 14 million. Maybe they can get them for like a portion of it. At the same time, I've been pounding the drum in a lot of my other shows about how if there's going to be a position that does potentially get squeezed in the free agency market, it could be point guard. We saw last offseason a lot of pretty good quality veterans did not get what they probably deserve. And a part of that had to do with the salary cap not really going up by much. Now it's going to go up by 10%, but the big difference between this year's free agency and last year's, there's only one cap space team right now, the Nets. Maybe Memphis, but it would be just for Jaren. Maybe Detroit has some cap space, but they might just run back the roster. So there's a pretty good amount of guards like the ones I just mentioned. I'm looking at a couple other guys like maybe Tyus Jones, Malcolm Brogdon. I'm not saying those guys get the minimum or anything like that, but maybe the Mavericks can get a guy like that on the bargain, for a bargain. In which case, do they really need to invest some of their players who I'm sure they really value, any further draft picks for a guard that, if Kyrie comes back fully healthy, is just going to get marginalized once he returns? So that's just like a very brief kind of scouting report as far as like the free agency market and how I think the Mavs will pursue it. I think they'll try to do the route that like costs the least amount of resources possible.
Yeah, for sure. That gives you at least the the first step, because you never want to have to trade somebody you don't need to trade, for sure, and explore the options out there. And I guess if you think about it as well, agents are going to view them as an opportunity as well. With how many games Kyrie Irving will potentially miss, that's at least an option where you can start the season and really showcase, your abilities, in a sense, more so than just straight up signing to be a backup with somebody else for comparable money. So I guess that could also be something to maybe consider for maybe their appeal for, free agents that are looking to not lock themselves into like a low long-term deal, but kind of like one of those like short-term, not necessarily fully like a prove it deal, but just like a rehab my value deal, in a sense. So maybe that could also help prevent the need to address it via trade. But at least if you do feel like it's necessary based off how the market plays out, which most likely from the way you described it doesn't sound like it would be necessary, I do at least think, maybe you look at that front court situation as that we don't really want to have to do this, but if we do have to do this, this is our best path sort of option. So definitely think the market for using an exception would probably be, something to definitely evaluate those options, because there are some intriguing names that you had mentioned. Like I think a Malcolm Brogdon is someone that could play with Kyrie if you do have him, because he has that 6'5", size. He can play with or without the ball. So I think maybe exploring options where you find that sweet spot, where the situation could be appealing to someone like that, could also be, worth considering overall when you're using that exception space.
Yeah, and it's a very obvious thing as far as where can you take away from the Mavs if you're going to upgrade the backcourt. It's a front court. And I do think there is a very realistic possibility that as we get deeper into the season, because Anthony Davis barely played for the Mavs, that it could get to that situation again where the coaching staff's like, listen, you got to play the five. And once that happens, then you are going to, one of Lively or Gafford are going to get squeezed out of the rotation. Well, maybe not quite that far, but now you just have, too many centers. So we could get to that point, and we'll touch on Gafford, Washington, because again, like also Washington, his role is just, sliding down to the three. I haven't really paid much attention of how that's been working. But either way, like when you look at some of these point guard options I mentioned, like the Mavericks are probably not like this is it's a pretty brutal downgrade to go from Kyrie Irving to not having his secondary scoring and playmaking and just, having one of these replacement guys. So if I feel like if they are going to stay pretty high in the standings, at least in the early part in the season, yeah, they probably do need to invest, trade one of their front court players to get a guy that can really be impactful for them. Now, we can get into briefly touch on some pie in the sky stuff, just more so like what is the viability of that? Because I'm looking at the chat. Jonathan Sealal, he asked trade AD and a pick for Giannis. And so the Mavs, they have 2 firsts. They have Anthony Davis, who, has significant value. I don't know exactly how much. I'm just going to I'm not going to get into like, is that something the Bucks would do? But just in general, when we're talking about some of the absolute best players that might be available this summer, Giannis, KD, I can't really think of who else might be available. I think there are some ways the Mavs could get into that mix. It would have to be an expanded type of trade. If they have 2 additional picks, they might have to get those involved. Have a team take on Anthony Davis that trades 3 or 4 first rounders for him, if that's possible, if that's out there. So they could potentially get in the mix to get a guy like that. I don't know. It just sounds really complicated. And then the other aspect is the Mavs they might have to get into their depth a little more. Because let's say if it's for KD, I think they want to keep Anthony Davis. You're going to have to trade like 4 guys to have this big 3. So that's as much as I'll go as far as like this, like some of these superstar guys. That might happen. I do wonder, though, as I'm thinking about this, maybe there's something the Mavs can do to turn Kyrie in his salary slot with their remaining picks, which is their 2025 first round pick and a 2031 first round pick. Would it make sense to help extend this window to package those with Kyrie to get a younger guard? If potentially, if Trae Young became available or LaMelo Ball, something like that. I don't know if I'd double down on this era, but I just wonder if that might be something the Mavs would be interested in doing. I kind of get the feeling that they still are so invested in Kyrie, though, that they'd rather let him, keep him recover, get him on a long-term deal, keep their assets, and just see what this group can do, because they never fully got the tested yet, and I think they're going to try to really give it its fair shot.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And the more you were explaining that, I just started to think of this guy who's 26 years old that might have been pretty solid to just still have. But thinking about the path ahead, definitely think they're pretty committed with Kyrie. I think they view him as that key, like, foundational piece that can also appeal to players to come play in Dallas and things like that. So I think from his standpoint as well, I think it probably makes the most sense to take advantage of having a team that has your bird rights, values you in that way, and then maybe try to sync contractually up with Anthony Davis, maybe like a 2+1. Maybe sacrifice a little bit of money if you have to because of the injury situation. That's something where I think it'll be interesting to kind of see. But I think in terms of just testing out what they have, I think it's just crazy to think, because it's like they might not even be able to do that until, like, I guess with the bigs they can, but like with Kyrie included, it might take months for that to happen. And then you're kind of squeezed up into the next transaction cycle with the trade deadline in February. So I guess it'll be interesting in that regard, where how much do they get to actually gauge what do they like about what they see, what do they not like. It's not too much time to see what you need around those key pieces, even if you are fully committed to that team build.
Yeah.
But I guess with the 11th pick or 12th pick, whatever it may be as well, that's another thing to maybe think about, is like, do you just use that pick on the best player available, since it's one of your only like young player mechanisms for the next little while that's in the lottery potentially. I guess that complicates it as well. Where do you want to invest and double down on what they have despite Kyrie's injury, while you have this asset that could add a, I guess, rotation level player on a good contract for the long term? I guess it's just a lot of complicated factors to weigh when you're thinking about navigating this situation.
I'm looking at just a quick mock draft of like the top 14, and yeah, that lottery pick could definitely come into play. There's a lot of guards at the top of the draft, so maybe they partially answer it there. Maybe they could turn that pick into a different younger guard that more fits your timeline. Doesn't need to be a guy that's gonna that are people are really high on, but if they can get just somebody that's, it doesn't even need to be early 20s, maybe mid 20s, and just is like pretty serviceable, that might be something they could consider. So they'll have some options there. Maybe they jump into the top 4. I mean, it's unlikely. What do they have? The 11th? Oh, they had the 11th. No, they're tied for 11th and 12th. I think it jumped up to 11th, right? I think.
Yeah, they did. I think the coin flip put them at 11 for odds.
I got to update it on my end. I don't know if the 11th has ever jumped up to the top 4. Maybe
because the Hawks were 10 when they jumped to 1. Right? Okay. Is that what happened?
I think so. And I know the Pelicans, when they got Zion, it was also similarly low. So I'm not sure if 11th has happened yet, but we'll see. And so you touch on just, investing more in this team And look, it might be the kind of case where the Mavs they might have to make some sort of move, whether they want to or not, for a guard. What if some of these guys, maybe they don't want to be there anymore? Just kind of speculative in my mind that after the Luka trade, I'm sure there's a lot of players that were not happy about it and seemed like that trade really sucked out the spirit. What if, like Klay Thompson, for example, decided he didn't want to be there anymore? I'm sure playing with Luka Doncic was a big part of that. Not that Klay Thompson has a ton of trade value that you're going to get a huge, like a nice like piece set for him, a nice guard for him. But if some players were to push out, and including some of the ones we'll get into, like PJ Washington or Daniel Gafford, who have 1 year left on their deal, they'll be extension eligible. What if, they might have to make a move anyways if some players maybe don't necessarily want to be in Dallas anymore. But let's just kind of get into those two guys I just touched on, Gafford and Washington. They are on expiring deals, and they both have the same type of max extension. It's about 4 for $90. So just kind of looking even more ahead, they can afford to bring back Kyrie at like a reduced amount and keep Gafford and Washington on raises, and they should still have like a similar payroll structure they have now, where they're like close to the tax or maybe slightly above it, and they can just run back this team another year. You touched on Derek Lively. He'll eventually be extension eligible. He's still got 2 years left on this, so they're still okay as far as that. So when discussing an extension with either of these guys, I think the debate is, should they roll with them on team-friendly deals, or if possible, or is it possible maybe we've seen the absolute best version of these guys? Like they're not like elite in their position by any means. Are the Mavs better off trading them and capitalizing on their recent play, or does extending them give them a little more value? So I'm a little mixed on these guys. But I do think, though, the Mavs would probably get more than what they originally gave up to get them. They traded a late first-round pick for PJ Washington. I could see them getting an equal value first-round pick and maybe like an additional young player as well, when you consider there needs to be some matching salary on the other end. They only traded a pick swap for Daniel Gafford. Now technically the Thunder, they received that pick swap and then traded a first-round pick to the Wizards to facilitate it, but I would guess Gafford does go for a solid first-round pick at least. So, I'm just like, I really started digging into their situations, and I just think, again, with any team with such an uncertain future, you're better off moving them sooner than later. And if you could get the type of value I just explained, I kind of think they'd be better utilized on an actual contender, instead of a team hoping that, things could improve and get them to that point.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think playing with Luka Doncic, I think benefited both of those guys a lot, and I think they're still impactful quality players as is in the current environment. It's just a little tougher for them to make as dynamic of an impact, especially if PJ is playing the 3 and you have less floor spacing. You're running the offense more through Anthony Davis at like the nail or the elbow. That's a little tougher for him because he was going from a guy who was the focus of the offense playing like high pick and roll, being able to attack closeouts with the defense out of rotation, things of that nature. It was just an easier brand of basketball, I think, for him. And they started to mix in, some of the strengths that he has, like being able to post up smalls. That's a little less valuable or frequently utilized whenever you have Anthony Davis as the default and you're running the offense through him already in the post. So I think, I could see where, maybe there's an argument for sure where you can capitalize on the short-term value of, what PJ Washington, had provided. Same with Daniel Gafford. Like, you're just not going to benefit as much from going away from one of the absolute best pick and roll players to ever play basketball, and to not having even Kyrie Irving. Like that's
Yes.
a tougher reality to live in, having to play off of another big. And then potentially, as we had mentioned, if you get into a situation where one of your midseason fixes is, well, maybe we need to play Anthony Davis more at the 5, well, there's a loser in that. It's anyone else that's playing
Yeah.
center in your
So
rotation. So definitely think that's something to consider.
so I'm trying to think who to start on, because I guess I'll start with PJ Washington, because how I feel about a situation very much is in line with what you just explained. Because it seemed like from what I was paying attention to, he was having arguably the best stretch of his career in like the early part of this season. You could also argue last year's playoffs that kind of carry over. So like he had a very strong 2024. He's still just 26. But I think I'm a little more bearish on his outlook on the Mavericks going forward than Gafford's with the Mavericks. And but more so when you consider that they're both probably going to get raises on their next extensions. Right now, it's just a weird fit with AD. I don't think this, him playing a position smaller is probably going to be sustainable. If they played enough games, they probably would have figured that out already. So I could see them eventually moving him. But just kind of quickly, do you think PJ can work on this? Can he build on his game more with the Mavs in this current role that they're going to probably continue having him in?
I think it's probably already like kind of capped to where he's at. I think statistically, I'm sure his numbers will go up when Kyrie is out, because he is someone that when you have injuries to one of the main guys, he does step up and can go off for like a 25, 30-point game. He's shown, capable of doing that. But when you have your full team and you're like problem solving for playoff basketball and things of that nature, I do think his skill set is worse off in this current like team build than it was prior. And I think also he's in a situation where lineup wise, year 2 and the 3 have to just really be phenomenal on-ball defenders, and he is a very good on-ball defender. But I think you have to get more of like a Derek Jones on-ball defender at some point, someone that can like really take the shifty guard assignment instead of having to guard straight up with Kyrie coming off an ACL tear, guarding those assignments. And with who they have, I just don't think they're necessarily like well equipped on the perimeter for like containing dribble penetration with kind of who they have. Because Najee Marshall is kind of in that same situation where he's kind of better off guarding up a position using his strength as opposed to guarding those shiftier offensive players. So I think they're going to have to really also consider that element of their current team build. But this is where I'm kind of conflicted, because if you were to have Anthony Davis shift over to the 5 a lot more where he doesn't necessarily want to play, I think PJ would be a phenomenal option at the 4. So that's just kind of the hard, the conundrum, I guess you will, that they find themselves in right now.
So assuming that this is the build they're going to start with, which I think they are, I would agree with you. I think it's kind of capped. Maybe he could get a little better. I just don't know how much better. And ultimately, I'm kind of seeing him like a really good 4th or 5th option on a great team, like a really great option. But that makes him like a really great role player instead of like a high-end starter or anything like that. So when you look, so he can extend for up to 4 years, $90 million, and Gafford can also extend for that amount, since they're both making like the same amount of money right now. So it would be kind of comparable to guys like Jaden McDaniels or Miles Bridges. And if you were to look, just as I kind of project his production going forward, I would guess he brings you more Miles Bridges production, like what Miles Bridges did this season, than like the type of impact Jaden McDaniels can bring you. I think Jaden McDaniels makes a little bit more than this, but I might be a little off on it. So if the Mavs are going to extend PJ now, I think you got to be pretty confident that he will make a somewhat meaningful leap, because if he doesn't, then I'm not too sure. Maybe it's not so much that it'll be like a bad contract, but then maybe you're not going to get such strong offers for him down the line. And I just struggle to see how his trade value would improve just with this role that we're still TBD to see exactly how it plays out, and there's no clear point guard to help. I'm kind of more on the fence of, I guess I would trade him sooner than later, now if possible. Capitalize on what he did last season as soon as you can. If it helps you bring in a young guard that can help sustain this window, I think I would want to do that instead of extending him now and then finding out later what you could get.
Yeah, I think with how much uncertainty they have overall, I think that probably does make the most sense. You don't want to commit financially long-term more and more and more, and then realize that, like, oh, now it's getting even more difficult to pivot, get assets and things of that nature. Because I think the situation, if you are trying to kind of walk that fine line of keeping the main guys like Kyrie, Anthony Davis, you got to find a way to get assets somewhere and be a little like fluid or liquid with the way you can build the rest of this roster out. And that probably has to come with some role players, or at least one. I think if you are in a situation where you're more so trying to, I guess, keep some of these guys in their mid-20s and are more willing to move the main guys, then that's where I think PJ Washington extending makes a lot of sense, because he would naturally take on a lot more importance. In that short term, the numbers would be higher for him, and then you can kind of gauge the market where his numbers are at an elevated level, and that might appeal to teams. But yeah, I just think with the way we expect them to go into next season and carry their roster build, it will be a little tough to necessarily get that great value out of an extension. So I think I definitely agree with you.
And there might be more value for the team bringing him in for the right to negotiate with him, where they can get him on something they feel comfortable with, especially maybe he gets that max level number paying him in the low 20s anyways, but maybe they could do something about the years if that helps. So yeah, I think that I would probably just, especially if AD is going to be there for the long term, I think I'd probably move PJ Washington. Maybe they make it work, but I guess we'll have to see a little bit first. So Gafford then, and this will be the last guy we talk about. So he's proven to be starting quality center, probably more in the lower back half of the best centers in the league. And they've had the luxury of not having to play him too much because they have another pretty similar level guy in Derek Lively. So he's also 26, so just like PJ Washington, pretty durable for most of his career up until this season. I mean, a lot of Mavs got hurt this season, but never really been injury prone. Pretty reliable guy. So he's going to definitely get a raise of some sort. So it's kind of like a range. Does he get the full max extension that pays him like an average of $23 million a year? Then you're getting as much as like, Ivica Zubac or Jakob Poeltl, which in some ways, if you can see him making that type of, not necessarily another leap, it's not even that big of a leap but if he can make some sort of improvement beyond what he is now, he doesn't need to be at the level of like Zubac. I think that's a lot to ask for. But if he does make like another step, okay, you could probably justify giving that full max extension. Otherwise, the floor might be something at just a little bit more than what he's currently making. Let's say it's like 15, 16 a year. Then you're looking at kind of like what Stewart and Okongwu are getting. I would guess he probably gets closer to that max. But I mean, do you think Gafford couldn't go up another level or two despite this clogged front court?
I think he's probably going to be stuck relatively similar as a ceiling to what his production has been, especially since they're committed from everything that I understand to having Lively, be the starter, and I'm sure they're going to want to see more from Lively, as his kind of career plays out in this early, couple stages as well, which I think naturally brings a little bit of a limiting factor for Daniel Gafford.
So I guess instead of saying is like, will he make another leap? I guess I'm more so on the side that based on his peaks, he probably outplayed his current deal. He's probably worth right now, and especially last year, a little more than what he was making. So I guess the question might be more so, can he at least maintain this level of finishing and defense if he gets back to playing with another elite playmaker? Because if a lot of teams believe that, then there should be a pretty robust market for him. And with the cap going up, probably should also feel pretty good about him making significantly more than what he's currently making. So I would imagine he's going to command that max extension, which it's nothing too crazy. You're just talking about like $23 million a year average. So if the Mavericks were to extend one or the other, I would probably feel a little better about giving that extension to Gafford. I feel like he has a better chance at maintaining his trade value with a max extension than PJ going forward with the Mavs. So yeah, I mean that's kind of where I'm at. Where I think what he did he just so vastly outperformed, not vastly, but like significantly outperformed what he was making. And I didn't really, when he first got this extension, I didn't expect him to reach quite this level. So I guess the bigger question might be, does he get like the max years? I could see him getting max dollars. Maybe instead of giving him 4 years, maybe they want to minimize it to 3. Do they have any questions about how this stuff might hold up by the time he reaches 30? Which, the shorter it is, maybe that even helps his trade value a little more going forward. The team could still extend him. Whoever gets him could extend him at the end of the deal later. Give him something a little more, whatever might reflect however his production is by then.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another factor to consider too with them is just with how much of an injury struggle their front court has had. I mean, Anthony Davis throughout his career is, that's well documented, but also Derek Lively has really struggled as well to stay healthy. I think you're going to probably need to have that third big man to be able to kind of relieve some of those injury issues that you'll kind of have throughout the course of the season, with someone missing a couple weeks. Really, when your foundation is built on the success and the interior presence of your bigs, taking one of those away, I guess, does limit, the floor that you have to kind of withstand those stretches, throughout the course of an 82-game season. So I do think with them being so committed to their vision of, that interior presence setting the tone, I think that's also something to consider as well, where PJ Washington's a, helpful, valuable player, but Daniel Gafford is like legitimately part of that, like very core identity that they want to build out. And for all those reasons, I think that's where you can, feel a little bit better about his value. Whether statistically it's going to increase or not. I think, as you mentioned, with the finishing efficiency and all that stuff, like the substance of what you're getting, I think it will sustain. I think he's shown he's obviously anyone's going to benefit from when they do play pick and roll with Luka Doncic, but he's someone that was still, an efficient player. He's someone that could bully those second units as well. So I think as long as you find that balance of not wanting, when healthy, to, I guess, diminish some of his role as you're going forward over the next couple of years, I think you can find that sweet spot when you kind of lay out all the factors, because there will be times where he'll take on an even greater importance when someone gets injured.
Yeah. If I had to guess, I kind of get the feeling they're going to extend both guys, and they just believe in it. It just seemed like they really believe in each one of their top 5 guys. In Nico's closing press conference, he really identified having a top 5 of Kyrie, Clay, PJ, AD, Gafford / Lively as a championship level 5. So seems like they really highly value these guys, and it seems like they might just give them both the max extension if that's something both guys want. Maybe they'll just hand it to them. I just want to touch on a couple comments. Travis Cox asked, Gafford for Reeves fits almost perfectly. This is something I've written about in Third Apron. If you told me that the Lakers were going to get Luka, I would have thought that they were going to trade LeBron and Reeves for Luka. I think that would have made a little bit more sense for the Mavs and probably the Lakers too, for them to pair Luka and AD. But then he also asks, Mavs have rights to Kai Jones, right? Trading Gafford in a smaller contract for guard opens up a spot for Kai to be the third big. In terms of the center rotation, yeah, right now it is pretty crowded when you look at Lively, Gafford, Powell / AD, who I'm sure will end up playing some 5. They could bring back Kai Jones anyways. I don't think he has any more two-way eligibility now that he finished his 4th season. So, yeah, at this point, if the Mavs want to bring back Kai Jones, it has to be on a standard contract. I alluded to Dwight Powell. Maybe he's the guy that they look to dump to save a little bit more money on their payroll so they can do some end of bench stuff. In which case, it just makes a little bit more sense, I think, if you can get Kai Jones on a minimum, I think that makes a lot more sense than having Dwight Powell on $4 million a year player option. We'll see what happens there. But Grant, that's about everything I've got. Thanks again for doing this and hopping on this second time. Do you have anything coming up that we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, just general coverage throughout the NBA offseason. I'll have news updates and just analysis of where they're at. Probably some NBA draft content as well, since they're one of those teams where that'll be an important thing to kind of think about, like which prospects are rising or could be available at number 11 if they stay at that spot. So just a lot of off-season content will be on the way for sure.
So everyone's still here. Please follow Grant on Twitter and Blue Sky, and make sure you subscribe to Dallas Hoops Journal. He's got really amazing Mavs content. I'm subscribed to it. I thought of his postmortem was just really thorough. And he's going to have a lot of good stuff as we get closer to the off season. You can also find his work on various other outlets. You could find, on his social media. I'm sure you can see more of that info. Thanks again, Grant. And for all of you still here, you can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. You can see it on the overlays at Yossi Goslin. Same thing with YouTube. See all my videos and podcasts there. Audio, Spotify, and Apple. Please subscribe to Third Apron. I'm going to have more intensive team outlooks. So every team that I've talked about on this podcast, I ended up doing a more deeper analysis on Third Apron. So at some point I'll do the Mavs, kind of get more into the nitty gritty on these extensions and potential Kyrie Irving situation and trade hypotheticals. And keep an eye on capsheets.com. I'm going to have a lot of updates as stuff changes. The lottery's in 2 weeks, so the picks will be reflected then. And I will be back this week talking about another team. See you guys then.